Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name's Ellis Grant. I'm 52 years old, born in Indiana, but I've been pushing a mop down the halls of downtown St. Luke's Medical Center in Houston, Texas for the last 18 years. Night shift janitor. It ain't glamorous, but it's quiet. And I know the building like the back of my hand. From the surgical suites on floor 6 to the utility access tunnels buried 2 stories beneath the ER. And tonight, I'm pretty sure I'm the last person alive inside this place. It started small. News reports about people getting aggressive in a hospital over in New Orleans. That was 3 days ago. CDC showed up on the second day. Then came the chatter about atypical rabies strains. That's when things started moving fast. Quarantine zones, roadblocks, the works. But none of it seemed to matter in Houston until last night. That's when the screaming started in the patient wards. I wasn't supposed to be working. My buddy, Jose Molina, another night janitor, called in sick. Said his daughter had a fever and he couldn't leave her alone. I told him to stay home. I'd cover for him. I wish I hadn't. By 1 a.m., code yellows were going out from the ICU. That's hospital speak for aggressive patients. Combative behavior. Usually it's someone detoxing or waking up from anesthesia in a panic, but this was different. Security was running full tilt, no jokes, no coffee breaks, just radios crackling and gurneys crashing into walls. A level 1 lockdown was declared by 2:15. That had only ever happened once before, during a gas leak in radiology. But this time, it wasn't a leak. The first real sign something was wrong came from the freight elevator near sublevel 1, where I usually started my shift. I was sweeping the loading dock area when I heard the radio on my belt buzz. Maintenance channel. Anyone got eyes on Vickers? That was Terry, our shift lead. Negative, someone else said. Last seen heading up from S3. Said he was checking the oxygen system. Now, Vickers was the kind of guy who always clocked out 10 minutes early. If he was missing, something was off. I took the service stairs down to sublevel 3 past the heavy double doors that separate the surgical storage from the morgue freezers. The air down there's always cold and still, like a cave. I found Vickers' toolbox halfway down the hallway. Still open, wrench on the floor, blood smeared across the wall. No sign of him. I backed away slowly and climbed back up, trying to convince myself that maybe he'd just cut himself and gone to get help, but I knew better. We weren't supposed to leave tools behind. Ever. By 3 a.m., the building had changed. The lights flickered more often. The intercom cut in and out with static. The security office, normally staffed with 3 guards, had gone silent. When I called up from the lower levels, no one answered. That's when the city made the call. I was outside the cafeteria when I heard the sound. A deep, metallic thunk echoed through the entire building, like a steel door slamming shut, but much louder. Emergency shutters. They were dropping. All the windows, first floor up to the surgical suites, sealed shut with foot-thick steel panels. I'd only seen them once before during a safety drill years ago, and only the city emergency command could trigger a full lockdown like that. Not even the hospital admin could override it. There were no alarms, no instructions, no countdown. They just sealed us in. I made my way up to the staff lounge on the 5th floor and turned on the TV. Every major network was broadcasting the same emergency alert system screen. Red text over gray static. CDC Biohazard Protocol, Region 7, enforced isolation in effect. All civilians in Hospital Sector St. Luke S Medical Center are to remain in place. Military units are en route. There was no mention of an evacuation. I tried my phone. No signal, except one bar if I stood near the windows by the roof antenna. I climbed up to the top floor and got a weak text from a cousin in Dallas. Turn on the news. Stay inside. Do not get bit. That was the first time I'd seen it written out like that. I spent the next hour trying to find someone, anyone alive. I moved floor by floor with my master keys, checking break rooms, nurse stations, even the chapel. Nothing. Not even a whisper. But I found bodies. One in the radiology tech room, slumped over her desk, looked like she'd bled out through the neck. A nurse lying half inside the elevator doors on the 3rd floor, like she'd tried to pry them open with her bare hands. And I found blood trails, lots of them. Some smeared like someone had been dragged. Others, handprints, too high up the wall to make sense. Some scratched into paint, like fingernails. I stopped searching after that. I holed up in the janitor's office in the basement around 6:30 a.m. The sun was up outside, but it barely made a difference with the blast shutters in place. I pulled the security feed from the old monitor in the closet. Only 4 cameras were still functional. 1 in the ER, 2 in hallways, and 1 on the roof helipad. That's when I saw her. A woman in a white lab coat running, sprinting across the ER waiting room. She had something in her hand, looked like a fire axe from the wall box. She was yelling at someone behind her, but the feed had no audio. Then I saw what she was running from. It was human, sort of. Same hospital gown as the patient's, except its face was wrong. The jaw looked slack, like it had been broken and set loose, and the eyes, milky, vacant, but still focused. It ran too, arms twitching, legs jerking in sharp bursts. Not like how a person runs, like a puppet with its strings pulled too tight. She turned the corner toward the surgical theater. The creature followed. That was the last I saw of either of them. At 7:45 a.m., the air vents kicked off. Emergency power now. That meant fuel cells or the rooftop solar was running low. Most of the backup power is routed to refrigeration units, emergency lights, and patient life support. The elevators were out. No more intercom. No more automatic doors. I used the manual override key to pry open a utility closet in the hallway and armed myself with the only thing I could find: a metal mop handle and a heavy-duty utility knife. Not much, but better than nothing. I knew then I couldn't stay in the basement. Too dark. Too many blind corners, no cameras, no power. So I moved up to floor 4, pediatrics. It had a lockable staff break room with thick glass windows and a clear line of sight down the hall. I wedged a chair under the door handle, pushed a file cabinet in front of it, and sat with my back against the wall. That's when I heard the first voice in hours. Not a scream, not an echo. A little girl. She was maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing one of those fleece jackets with cartoon penguins on it. Her name tag read Emily. I spotted her peeking out from the hallway near the nurse's station. I lowered my voice, called out softly. She ran and hid, but she didn't run far. Eventually, she crept close enough for me to unlock the door. She wasn't bitten. She wasn't bleeding. Just scared. Trembling and clutching a plush rabbit with one arm. Said her mom worked in pediatrics and had told her to hide when the lights started going out. She'd been holed up in a supply closet with a bag of Halloween candy and bottled water for over 12 hours. I gave her my coat and some crackers from the vending machine. We didn't talk much that day. She mostly slept. I stayed by the door, watching the hallway with the utility knife in one hand. Every once in a while, I'd hear movement. Shuffling footsteps. Coughing that wasn't quite human. The sound of something tapping on tile, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging metal fingers down a wall. We stayed locked in that room until nightfall, but I knew we couldn't stay there forever. Tomorrow came quickly. I didn't sleep much. Between the occasional banging echoing through the walls and Emily whimpering quietly in her sleep, I stayed awake most of the night. I kept my back to the door, knife in my lap, eyes on the narrow hallway outside. The overhead lights had flickered out around 2 a.m., and by the time the first pale streaks of daylight crept around the edges of the steel-sealed windows, only the red glow of the emergency exit signs remained. Every creak, every breath, sounded like a shout in the silence. I wasn't even sure what time it was when I decided to move. I wrapped Emily in a hospital blanket, tucked her plush rabbit into the crook of her arm, and told her it was time to go. She didn't say anything, just nodded and stood close. She was quiet, obedient, which made me think she'd already seen more than she could process. She didn't cry anymore. She didn't ask about her mom. Kids don't shut down like that unless something deep inside them already knows the truth. We stepped out into the hallway and crept past the nurse station. The emergency lighting cast long shadows across the linoleum floor. Every monitor screen was dark. No beeps, no chatter from radios. Just the faint electric buzz of backup power struggling to hold on. I carried the knife and the mop handle in one hand, my backpack in the other. It had some crackers, gauze, one small bottle of rubbing alcohol, and a radio that still refused to pick up more than static. The stairwell to the roof was 5 floors up, but the ICU stood directly in our path. There was no other way around. Elevators were dead. Emergency hatches in the ducts would have taken hours to get through even if I had tools. The ICU was the quickest and most dangerous path to the roof. I hadn't been inside since the early hours of the lockdown, when the first patient bit a nurse's throat open. I pushed the stairwell door open slowly. No alarms, no clicks, just stale air and the sound of distant wind rushing through vents. I led Emily up the steps one level, pausing to listen every few seconds. Floor 5 was the ICU. I paused at the landing, then pushed the door open just enough to peek through. Nothing moved, but the smell hit me like a brick wall. Rotten meat, antiseptic, and something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit and burned plastic. I motioned for Emily to stay behind me, pressed a finger to my lips, then slipped through the door. The hallway outside the ICU nurse station was a mess. IV stands were knocked over, and ceiling tiles hung loose like vines. Blood coated the floor in thick, dark patches. Some of it had dried and cracked. Other streaks were fresher. I recognized some of the names still scribbled on the whiteboard by the nurse desk. Patient 400 2B Campbell, R, observation. Patient 403, A. Donaldson, K. seizure watch. Names that had once meant something. Now they were just ghosts. We crept past the main hallway junction, past broken glass and shattered medical carts. I kept to the side, near the wall, watching each room number as we passed. Most of the doors had been left ajar. Inside, I could see slumped shapes, unmoving under sheets or beside beds. Some looked too still. Others twitched when we passed, as if hearing us in their sleep. I held my breath and moved faster. Halfway down the hallway, I heard something. Not footsteps, not moaning. It was the sound of someone breathing, fast, shallow, and panicked, coming from room 509. I edged toward the door, careful not to step on glass. Peeking through the crack, I saw a woman, mid-30s maybe, curled into the corner of the room behind an overturned hospital bed. Her clothes were soaked in blood, but I couldn't tell if it was hers. Her eyes were wide, locked on something behind me. I turned slowly. One of the bodies near the nurse station had risen. It was a man, tall, wearing an ICU patient gown. The back was stained dark down to his calves. His left foot dragged behind him like it had been broken clean through. But he moved fast. His head snapped up like a dog catching a scent, and he let out a wet, ragged exhale, more a hiss than a breath. I didn't wait. I grabbed Emily and sprinted down the hallway toward the trauma wing. Behind us, I heard the clatter of something metal falling over, maybe a tray cart, as the creature scrambled after us. Its steps were jerky, not rhythmic. Too fast, too loud. I kicked open a side door and shoved Emily through, slamming the door shut behind us and locking the latch. We were in a former recovery suite. A dead end, but with another stairwell access if I remembered right. I turned to find the woman from room 509 had followed us. She had a pair of scissors in her hands and her breathing was still wild, erratic. "Don't come closer," she said. "I swear, if you're infected—" "We're not," I said. "We're not. We're just trying to get to the roof. The antenna—" She didn't lower the scissors, but I could see the fear in her eyes was fighting the exhaustion. "My name's Ellis. This is Emily," I continued, slowly raising my hands. "You, from ICU?" She finally exhaled and nodded. "Dr. Andrea Lang, infectious diseases." Her white coat was gone, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. A deep gash down her right forearm held shut with gauze and what looked like electrical tape. She saw me looking and shook her head. "It's not a bite. I smashed a window getting out." That was enough for me. We barricaded the door with a supply cart and moved to the other end of the suite, where a maintenance stairwell sat hidden behind a crash bar door. I had to use my master key to pop the manual lock override. Took nearly 5 minutes, but it finally clicked open. I could feel fresh air coming down from above. We were close. The stairwell wound up another 3 floors. Metal stairs, narrow and loud. We climbed in near silence, pausing only when Emily's legs gave out and I had to carry her for the last flight. Dr. Lang moved behind me, glancing back every few seconds like she expected something to crash through the stairwell door. By the time we reached the roof access hatch, my arms were shaking from the weight, but we made it. The hatch wasn't locked, but it had a rusted deadbolt that took all 3 of us working together to snap loose. When we pushed it open and climbed out into the bright daylight, it was like stepping into another world. The air was warm, the sky was clear, and for a moment, it felt like we'd escaped. But we hadn't. The hospital roof was ringed with antennas, HVAC vents, and the helipad. I moved straight for the main signal array, a steel tower about 12 feet high, with a blinking red light at the top and a boxy antenna panel facing downtown. Dr. Lang followed behind, scanning the city. I could see her shoulders tense as her eyes traced the skyline. Fires still burned in scattered pockets along the far edge of the medical district. In the distance, smoke rolled from the direction of the I-69 overpass, black, thick, unbroken. Traffic lights blinked uselessly over empty streets. The city had gone silent. No sirens, no helicopters, no rescue teams, just the hum of the wind slipping over the rooftop. When the emergency broadcast repeated for the 3rd time with the same monotone message, "Stay in place, extraction delayed," I shut the radio off and stared at the panel. The signal was strong. The antenna was still functional, but it didn't matter. No one was listening. The emergency frequency had become a loop, the same kind we used for tornado drills and chemical spills. Whoever had programmed it wasn't on the other end anymore. We stayed on the roof for nearly an hour. None of us spoke much. Emily curled up on the concrete beside one of the rooftop vents, fast asleep despite the heat. Dr. Lang sat cross-legged against a crate of medical oxygen tanks, her blood-soaked gauze now visibly seeping through her makeshift bandage. I handed her a packet of disinfecting wipes and some gauze pads from my bag. "This needs sutures," she muttered as she peeled the tape back. I nodded. "We need supplies anyway. I know a way down that avoids the ICU." Her head lifted slightly. "Where?" "Service chute behind diagnostics. Maintenance only route. I've used it to haul old monitors and sharp spins to the incinerator. It comes out near the operating suites, south corridor, second floor." "And the pharmacy?" she asked. "Same wing, just one floor down." We both knew what had to be done. The rooftop wasn't safe long-term, no food, no water, no shelter from the heat. And even with the signal tower active, no one was responding. We had a chance to gather medical supplies, maybe more radios, even some food. But we'd have to go back into the belly of the building, into the dark, where the infection had taken root. I carried Emily down the first few rungs of the roof ladder while Dr. Lang watched the stairwell. We re-entered the building through the same hatch we'd exited earlier, locking it behind us with a length of steel wire I twisted through the bolt bracket. It wouldn't stop anything determined, but it might buy us a minute if something followed. The maintenance route I'd mentioned wasn't well known. You had to push a cleaning cart into a corner of the diagnostics hall and open a narrow door hidden behind the old MRI control room. Most staff didn't even know it existed. It ran along the exterior wall in a narrow concrete shaft lined with piping and broken lighting. At the far end was a steep utility chute with an access ladder welded to the frame. The climb down was brutal. 20 vertical feet, dim lighting, no rails. We took it slow. I climbed first, then helped Emily down. Dr. Lang came last, her face pale and drawn, her left hand pressing into her side like the pain was growing. When we reached the bottom, I wedged a rolling file cabinet in front of the maintenance door to block it behind us. The operating suite corridor was silent. I knew this level well. Oars lined one side, recovery rooms and nursing workstations the other. 2 fire doors had been manually locked with chains, clearly an attempt by someone to contain whatever outbreak had started. I bypassed the ORs for now and led us to the west wing, where the internal pharmacy was kept in a fortified glass room behind a security-coded door. To my surprise, the pharmacy had power. Weak fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as we stepped inside. Shelves of controlled medications lined the walls. Oxycodone, Ativan, insulin, epinephrine, antibiotics. We didn't need most of it. I loaded my backpack with what I knew could help. Broad-spectrum antibiotics, sterile syringes, morphine vials, adrenaline injectors, lidocaine, antiseptic creams, painkillers, and gauze. I handed Dr. Lang a surgical suture kit and some saline. She took them with trembling fingers and sat down behind the counter to work on her wound. "You know how to do that?" I asked. "Worked 3 years in ER before infectious diseases, stitched up more heads than I care to remember." She bit down on a surgical towel as she cleaned the wound. I turned away and kept sorting. Behind the pharmacy counter was a locked fridge unit. I used a crowbar from the supply closet to pry it open. Inside were meal replacement drinks, water bottles, and a few sealed packs of hospital-grade nutrition paste. I passed 2 drinks to Emily, who drank one slowly while watching Dr. Lang with wide, unblinking eyes. Then I gave her a mini flashlight and told her to stay close to me. We left the pharmacy an hour later, better equipped but no less afraid. I thought we might be able to make it to radiology next. That wing had backup generators and diagnostic computers, maybe even a working terminal with network access. But when we reached the corridor junction, we found the fire doors had been forced open. Blood coated the frame. Deep gouges had been carved into the door's interior by something sharp. Bone or steel, I couldn't tell. But whatever had done it had gotten through. I heard the first sound behind us as we crossed toward the stairwell. Faint, metallic and rhythmic, like claws tapping on tile. We froze. Dr. Lang drew a scalpel she'd taken from the pharmacy. I held my mop handle tightly, knife tucked in my belt. Emily pressed into my hip, flashlight flicked off, eyes locked on the corridor ahead. The tapping grew louder. Then it stopped. I slowly turned the flashlight on and aimed it toward the far hall, just past the surgical prep area. The beam landed on a figure hunched in the hallway, still, head tilted sideways, one shoulder twitching in slow pulses. Its face was turned away from us, but I could see the outline of exposed teeth and something glistening on its chest. Dr. Lang pulled me back. "That's not one of the first-stage infected," she whispered. "The twitching, that kind of pause, it's a sign of neurological shift, second-stage progression." "You're saying it's getting worse?" "I think it's learning." I didn't want to wait to find out what that meant. We backed into the stairwell and climbed one level up, heading towards administration. It was one of the few sections with natural light. Big skylights, even a balcony. If we had to barricade somewhere again, it was our best option, but we didn't get that far. As we crossed the administrative wing, we heard it again. Another sound behind us, but this time it wasn't tapping. It was breathing. Loud, guttural, wet. And it wasn't alone. I yanked open the first unlocked office door and shoved Emily and Lang inside. We slammed the door and pushed a filing cabinet in front of it just as the footsteps rounded the corner. The door shook violently once, then again. Metal bent, hinges groaned. Then it stopped. We didn't move. I turned the flashlight off. The only sound now was our breathing and the distant hum of the emergency lights in the hallway. Dr. Lang crouched beside the desk, eyes closed, lips moving silently. I think she was praying. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then we heard footsteps moving away. A slow retreat, but not a permanent one. We stayed in that office for hours. Eventually, Dr. Lang ran a line of sterile gauze around the broken lock, trying to reinforce the door. Emily curled up beneath the desk again. I leaned back against the window and let my legs finally relax. "What do you think they were?" I asked quietly. Lang didn't answer right away. "Neuroinvasion," she said finally. "This virus, whatever it is, it doesn't just kill the host, it controls it. Like toxoplasmosis in rodents, alters behavior. But it's not just random aggression. I think it's adapting to our routines, it learns. Movement patterns, weak points in doors, where we hide, what we fear." "So, you're saying they're not just sick?" "No, I think we're dealing with a complete neural hijack. Something that uses the brain as scaffolding, but overlays its own signals. They're puppets, but the puppeteer is getting better at pulling strings." I looked at Emily, asleep again despite the chaos. She didn't have the words for any of this. But she understood more than we thought. Kids always do. I pulled out the last bottle of water and split it between us. The sunlight through the tinted window had started to dim. Evening again, another night in this sealed tomb. I watched the skyline through the reinforced glass. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, I imagined people still living ordinary lives, unaware, or maybe just pretending not to see. Helicopters might have flown over this building once. Drones, searchlights. But now the city had drawn a line around us, sealed off the sick, and left behind anyone who didn't make the list. That included a janitor, a half-crippled doctor, and a girl with no one left to cry for. Dr. Lang had started coughing again. She swore it was just dust, but I could see the sweat along her brow even in the cool office air. Her bandaged arm was inflamed now, skin puffed red around the sutures. Infection or something worse, I wasn't sure. The antibiotics we'd taken from the pharmacy might have helped, but if the wound was deep and the tape job sloppy, they'd only be buying time. We couldn't stay on this floor. Whatever we'd seen in the surgical wing, whatever had found us near radiology, it was still out there. We hadn't outrun it. We'd just delayed the inevitable. And we were out of food. The lights were flickering again. The backup battery systems were failing, probably rerouting what little charge remained into life support machines that hadn't seen a living patient in 24 hours. When those systems died, so would the last of the lights. Then we'd be moving through pitch-black halls with no way to navigate and no idea how many were left hunting. I opened my notebook, the one I kept in my back pocket during my shifts where I logged equipment failures, spills, bulb outages. I tore out a blank page and drew a rough outline of the hospital's main floor. Loading dock to the west. Emergency department to the east. Between those points were a dozen locked hallways, one elevator shaft, and a series of freight corridors no wider than a stretcher. Our only real chance was the receiving bay. If we could reach the lower-level ramp and override the freight lift gate, we might be able to exit through the back alley where medical waste was hauled out twice a week. I knew the panel code. The keypad would probably still work if its battery hadn't failed. But we'd have to pass through the diagnostic imaging department to get there, and that meant going down another 2 flights of stairs, crossing the pathology corridor, and slipping through an area that had no cameras, no glass windows, and no emergency lighting. Even on normal days, that part of the hospital was dead quiet. At night, it was like walking through a mausoleum. Still, we had no choice. We waited until full dark, then made our move. I carried Emily again, wrapped in a lab coat we'd found in the break room, her face tucked into my chest. She didn't speak anymore, just followed. Silent, calm, resigned. Dr. Lang moved slowly but steadily behind me, syringe of morphine tucked into her pocket just in case she needed to dull the pain in a hurry. I had the mop handle strapped to my shoulder and the knife in my belt, but I doubted either would matter if we ran into one of those things again. The last one we saw had moved with a kind of muscle memory, ducking under hanging wires, leaping over carts, using angles and lines of sight. It had studied us, followed with purpose. That wasn't something a simple virus could do, that was something else. We entered the stairwell through the old HR department, slipped past rusted handrails and forgotten CPR posters still stapled to bulletin boards. The air was colder now. The building was losing heat. Systems failing one by one. My boots crunched over broken glass on the landing level 2. Dr. Lang froze behind me, hand up. We heard it too. Voices. Not loud, almost a whisper, but definitely human. We crept closer. 2 figures in nurse scrubs were seated on the floor against the far wall. At first, I thought they were survivors. They were talking, one softly muttering, the other nodding slowly in rhythm. But as we stepped closer, I saw their mouths weren't moving. The sound was coming from somewhere else. A looping tape recorder lay between them, running a constant cycle of conversation. Familiar phrases, hospital code numbers, jokes between coworkers. And the nurses weren't breathing. Their eyes were open, and they were moving. Their heads turned toward us in unison, faces slack but twitching at the corners. Their jaws shifted, dislocated just enough to look unnatural. One stood. The other crawled, spider-like, backward across the floor before righting herself. Neither made a sound, but both began advancing. We backed into the stairwell and slammed the door shut behind us. I jammed a broken broom handle through the hinges and shoved my body against it as the weight of something slammed into the other side, once, twice, then silence again. No footsteps, no breath, just waiting. They were playing with us. I didn't say anything, just turned and kept moving. When we reached the diagnostic corridor, I almost didn't recognize it. The walls were painted with something, blood or rust or both, smeared in long vertical streaks like someone had clawed their way down the hallway. Machines were overturned. The floor was cracked in places, tiles pulled free like teeth. We passed through radiology, then pathology, careful not to make noise. That's when we saw the security door ahead, the freight bay, still intact. I stepped up to the keypad, brushed off the dust, and entered the override code 82741. Nothing. I tried again, slower, same code. Still dead. Dr. Lang stepped beside me and knelt down to inspect the access panel beneath it. "Battery's dry," she whispered. "No power, no circuit signal." I felt something in my chest give way. All that effort, and we were still trapped. No exit, no comms, no time. But Lang stood and motioned to a nearby side hallway. "There's another panel on the electrical subfeed junction. If we can hotwire the battery line, we might get one charge out of it, enough to open the door." I turned to Emily, told her to stay behind the stack of overturned gurneys, and then followed Lang toward the junction closet. That's when everything went wrong. The noise started as a low hum, then rose sharply into a shriek, metal grinding like a steel saw on concrete. The ceiling above us trembled, lights flickered and died, and then the scream came. Not human, not entirely. It reverberated through the walls, deeper than lungs could make, like it echoed through bone. I grabbed Lang and yanked her toward the wall just as the ceiling panel burst open and something dropped through it. Twisted, too long-limbed, too fast. It struck the tile in a crouch, head cocked, skin mottled gray with black streaks running under the surface like mold and muscle tissue. Its eyes were human. Still blue, still watching. Then it lunged. I swung the mop handle and caught it across the face, but it barely flinched. Lang jammed the morphine syringe straight into its neck and pushed the plunger. It roared, not in pain, but like it was choking on rage, then turned its full weight onto her. She went down, screaming. I grabbed her coat and yanked with everything I had, pulling her out from under the thing's weight as it thrashed and flailed. The drug didn't kill it, but it slowed it. I stabbed the utility knife straight through the side of its throat. That worked better. It gurgled, body spasming, and crashed into the file cabinet behind us. We didn't wait. Lang was limping, bleeding again, but upright. We ran back to the loading bay door. The second panel, by some miracle, still had power. A tiny flicker of green behind the dusty cover. I pulled it open, stripped 2 wires and jammed them into the keypad's battery terminal. The pad blinked to life. I punched the code 82741. A red light turned green. The motors wheezed. The heavy steel loading bay door began to rise, slowly, painfully. Outside was the alley, empty. The air smelled of burned rubber and stagnant water, but it was free air. I turned, scooped Emily into my arms and shouted for Lang to move. She was behind me, pale, limping, but still pushing forward. She was almost through when something grabbed her leg. Not the same one from before, another. Crawling out of the service grate behind us. She screamed. I grabbed her arm, pulled. Her leg bent unnaturally. She gritted her teeth and hissed, "Don't stop." We dragged her out into the alley as the door clanged halfway open and jammed in place. They didn't follow. Not at first. They stood in the shadows, just beyond the threshold. Watching. Like they knew this was the line. Like they couldn't, or wouldn't, cross it yet. Lang passed out 10 steps later. I carried her and Emily up the alley and into the back streets, where I finally saw real sky again. The smoke, the stars, and in the distance, barely visible, was the flicker of headlights. Military convoy. I lit the last flare I had and waved it with one shaking arm until I collapsed to my knees. They took us in just after dawn. Lang lived. Barely. Her leg was gone by the time they stabilized her, but she smiled at me from the gurney as the helicopter lifted us off the ground. Emily never said a word again. They burned the hospital 3 hours later. It collapsed in on itself like a dying lung. But I saw them. Just before the flames took it, one figure stood behind the glass of the surgical wing, watching us lift off. It didn't scream, it didn't flinch, it just stared. It wasn't angry or afraid. It was waiting. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.